in the dead of night, inside a pitch-black container with no escape. A child's breath trembles like a cry, echoing from the edge of life. And Efua, the woman who once locked others in that same cage, now clutches the girl to her chest, shaking. Sweat, blood, and guilt cling to her like a sentence etched into skin. But then, in the choking dark, she rips the door open with the very hands that once closed it. She runs into the forest not out of fear, but because for the first time, she's chosen the side of light. This isn't just a story of redemption. It's the rebirth of a soul, once soaked in blood, now desperate to water something innocent, something still growing. Subscribe to our channel now to follow more powerful, gripping, and deeply human storytelling films, where every scar speaks. Under the unforgiving heat of a Kumasi afternoon, the world begins not with a whisper, but with silence so heavy it crushes the breath from the land. The grass here is brittle, cracked. The red dirt bears no mercy, and the sky above is a lid of steel-gray haze. A vulture lands, then another. Their wings flap in the rhythm of slow death. A hand caked in blood and dust twitches. It's the only movement in the frame. That hand belongs to Efua. Her face, half buried in the gravel, is bruised, sunburned, and expressionless, but her chest still rises faintly. The dried blood on her lips, the broken sandal beside her, the burned tire not far off, all are echoes of a night gone violently wrong. Then cut to black. A sudden cold sound pierces the slam of a car door. Her mind fractures. Voices shout in overlapping tongues. Twee pidgin English rushing past each other, like waves smashing a cliff. A scream. Male guttural. Another scream, this one cut off, followed by gunfire. 3 shots. Muffled, then silence, and then tires spinning in dust. We cut back to the present. Efua's eyes open slightly, pupils dilated, unfocused. She tries to lift her head, but fails. The corner of her mouth twitches as though trying to speak, but no sound comes. A single tear escapes, cutting a clean line down her dusty cheek. The shot widens. Around her, nothing but desolation. An expanse of abandoned earth, scattered with rusted tin scraps, discarded plastic, and whispers of violence. The sky rumbles, thunder in the distance. Birds retreat. Then from far away, a faint bleat, again. Closer now. Footsteps, not boots, not the thud of men with purpose. Bare, deliberate, grounded. The camera pans to reveal a silhouette emerging through the haze. An older woman wrapped in woven kente cloth, faded by the sun. Her gait is slow but steady. She carries a staff and leads a small group of sheep. One of them strays. That's what brings her off the path into the clearing where Efua lies. The woman stops. Her eyes lock onto the figure in the dirt, not with fear, not with judgment, but with something else, something ancient, as though she has seen this before. No dialogue, just the wind, the grass brushing her skirt. The uneasy snort of a sheep as it senses the blood. She kneels. Her hands hover above Efua's shoulder, hesitating. There's no rush in her movements. She knows this kind of broken. Then gently she touches Efua's temple, brushing away the matted hair and grime. The old woman's expression doesn't flinch, though her brow tightens. She leans closer, listening, and Efua, barely conscious, breathes out a wordless sound, like a sob that forgot its name. The woman slides one arm beneath Efua's back, another under her legs. Slowly, she lifts. The body is limp, but she bears the weight like she's done this before with dead goats, maybe, or women who lost themselves under the wrong moon. They walk, the sheep follow. Camera tracks behind them. The bloody dirt, the vulture watching from its perch, the slow retreat into the rising heat shimmer of the hills. Cut to the inside of a small hut. Clay walls, a woven mat. Herbs hanging from the ceiling, drying. A dog snoozes in the corner but stirs as they enter. The old woman lays Efua on a thick straw mattress. There's no electricity, only soft daylight filtering through torn fabric over the window. The room smells of lemongrass ash and survival. The woman, Mame Ajoa, moves silently, methodically. She washes Efua's wounds with warm water wrung from a cloth that's stained but clean. Efua groans at the touch, flinching. Mame hums. Not a lullaby, something older. A funeral rhythm, slow and low. Outside, rain begins. Gentle at first, then harder. The dog curls beside Efua. One of the sheep bleats outside, unbothered by the storm. Efua sleeps, but her dreams are anything but restful. We dive into her mind, fast, stuttering images. The inside of a truck. A child crying in a metal cage. Hands exchanging money. A man with scarred knuckles and gold rings leans in and whispers, "You bring the girls. You eat. You fail, you disappear." Then static. Then the face of someone, Kojo. His eyes wide, his wrists bound, his lips mouthing her name. Gun pressed to his head. Efua's own hand trembling held out. Not to save him, but to take the money. She blinks. Back to black. The thunder cracks louder. Efua wakes with a start. Gasping. She claws at her throat like something is still choking her from the inside. Mame is sitting nearby, peeling cassava. She glances up, says nothing, just nods once. Efua opens her mouth to speak. She can't. Or maybe she won't. Mame gestures to a cup of water beside the mat. Efua drinks. The water tastes like ash and roots. But it steadies her. The rain begins to ease. Mame finally speaks, not looking at Efua, but slicing through cassava like it's her own thoughts she's carving. Sometimes she says blood doesn't leave the hands. But the hand, it can still plant seed. Efua stares at her palms, red stains in the lines. No tears now, just breath and silence. The shot pulls back. The camera exits the hut through the open window, rising slowly into the misty hills above. From here we see it all, the worn path leading from death to shelter. The sheep resting under a tree, the smoldering sky, the far-off siren, faint but growing louder. And in the center of it all, a girl whose hands, once trafficked, despair now cradled in a stranger's grace. Cut to black. A single beat of silence, then a sound, a heartbeat, stronger this time. The sound of rain fades into the chirping of early birds and the slow rustle of morning wind. The window is open just enough to let the breeze slip through stirring strands of Efua's hair, where she lies still weak but alive on a woven straw mat covered with a faded kente blanket. Outside, a sheep bleats gently. A wooden wind chime clinks against itself in the threshold. Inside, Mame Ajoa kneels by a clay bowl, grinding herbs with a slow, circular rhythm. Her fingers are worn. From years, not from violence. There's a difference. The air in the hut is thick with scent, turmeric, neem, wild ginger, and something slightly bitter. Bitter like truth. Her skin holds the smell of open fields and burning roots, like she's become part of the land itself. She is the kind of woman who doesn't need to ask where you've been. She can already smell it on your soul. Efua stirs. Her body moves first, shoulder flinching, legs twitching as if trying to escape even before her mind returns. Then her eyes snap open. Panic instantly spreads across her face like spilled kerosene. Her breath quickens. Her gaze darts around wild, calculating exits, hands gripping the blanket like it's a weapon or a shield. Her mind is still stuck in that truck, still smelling sweat, metal, and fear. She tries to sit up too fast. The pain clamps down. A cry slips out before she can swallow it. Mame doesn't turn around. She keeps grinding. "You'll tear your stitches," she says softly in Twi. Efua freezes. Then Mame finally looks at her. Calm, steady. She doesn't smile. She doesn't flinch at the raw, almost animal fear in Efua's face. "You're safe," she adds, as if saying it makes it real. Efua shakes her head, inching back on the mat. Her voice is hoarse, scraped raw. "Who are you? What do you want?" Mame wipes her hands on her wrapper, sets the bowl aside, and walks over. She sits on the dirt floor, not too close. "I'm just Mame," she says. "I found you under the sky." Efua's eyes flicker toward the door, calculating the distance. "You can go if your feet still want to," Mame says, nodding toward the path outside. "But I think your hands are more tired than your legs." Efua doesn't respond. Her fingers tremble in her lap. She hides them under the blanket. Silence hangs between them. A heavy loaded silence, but not hostile. Just full like soil holding seed. Mame pulls out a calabash and pours a thick green liquid into a cup. She offers it still seated on the floor. Efua sniffs it suspicious. What is it? Warm leaves, Mame says, for cold blood. Efua takes it with both hands. She tries not to let it spill, but her hands betray her shaking uneven. A few drops fall onto her lap. She stares at them like they're blood. Mame notices. She doesn't say a word, just waits. Efua finally drinks. It's bitter, almost sour. But there's something comforting under it. Like the taste of something your grandmother used to make when the fever came. I shouldn't be here, Efua whispers. I know, Mame answers. Efua looks at her startled. She expects denial, comfort. Not this. But here you are, Mame continues. So now we choose what that means. Efua's breath hitches. Her throat closes. She tries to blink it back, but the tears come anyway, angry, hot, helpless. I didn't ask for this, she says. Mame nods. No one ever does. Efua turns her face away, ashamed of crying in front of this stranger. Mom stands. She picks up a wooden bowl filled with salves and cloth. Let me see your hand. Efua hesitates. I said, let me see it. There's steel in her voice now. Not cruel, just unbreakable. Efua slowly unwraps the blanket. Her right hand is swollen, stitched with a rough but careful line. The skin around the knuckles is bruised dark purple. She doesn't look at it, Aunt. Mame crouches, takes her wrist, and begins cleaning the area. Her touch is firm, practiced. She applies the salve, then rewraps the hand. Efua studies her face, the way her mouth sets, the way her eyes never leave the wound. You're not afraid, Efua finally asks. Of what? Me. Mame looks up. Why would I fear something already bleeding? That breaks something inside Efua. The tears now come faster, unstoppable. Her shoulders shake. She buries her face in her elbow, trying to mute the sobs. But they echo in the small room like the sound of glass breaking. Mame doesn't move. She lets it happen. Doesn't speak, doesn't touch. Just waits. When the storm passes, Efua lies there drained. She wipes her nose with the edge of the blanket like a child. Her voice is so soft it almost gets lost in the wind. I haven't cried in 10 years. Then you're 10 years overdue, Mame replies. A sheep bleats loudly outside. Mame rises and steps out to check on it. Efua watches her go, then slowly swings her legs off the mat. Her feet touch the dirt floor. She winces, but she stands. She walks toward the doorway, wobbling slightly. She leans against the frame, and she sees it. The field, rough, beautiful, untamed. She sees the sheep, dozens of them moving slowly in the grass, and one lamb, pure white, just a few weeks old, wandering near the edge of the hut. Its wool is impossibly clean against the red earth. Efua crouches, holding her bandaged hand to her chest. The lamb stares at her, then steps closer. She doesn't move. It nudges her knee. Her eyes well up again, but this time not from fear or guilt. She hesitates, then reaches out. Her hand, still trembling, brushes the lamb's head. Soft, warmer than she imagined, and for the first time in years, her fingers don't shake. She lifts it. It doesn't resist. It folds against her, trusting. Efua hugs it to her chest. The wool presses against her skin like forgiveness. From behind, Mame watches. She doesn't smile, but her eyes narrow just slightly as though marking a beginning. The wind picks up, the grass sways. Efua buries her face in the lamb's fur and exhales deeply, raggedly, like she's breathing for the first time. She doesn't say thank you. She doesn't have to. The camera lingers. The lamb's small heartbeat thumps against her chest. Her bandaged hand, open, still cradles life. And behind her, Mam turns toward the hills, lifts her chin, and whispers to the wind. Let this one stay. Under the late sun of the Ghanaian afternoon, the fields glow in hues of gold and dust. The air is heavy with the scent of dry grass, fermented mango, and ash from the morning's cooking fire. Somewhere in the distance, a motorbike backfires. A sharp sound, quick, careless. Efua freezes. She's crouched by a wooden pen, attempting to pour feed into a trough, but the sudden noise slashes through her body like a blade. The tin bowl in her hand slips and clatters to the ground, scattering feed like shrapnel. Her breath halts. Her eyes widen. Her mind has left the present. Her body remains paralyzed. The sheep don't flinch. But Efua does. Behind her, Mame watches quietly from the shade, her hands deep in a basket of drying cassava. She doesn't call out, doesn't offer comfort. She just watches, like watching a storm that hasn't yet realized its past. Efua closes her eyes and exhales long, like forcing poison from her ribs. She bends, picks up the tin bowl, and finishes the task, but her hand doesn't stop shaking. The next few days pass in soft silence. Efua works. She sweeps the floor of the hut, folds the mats, grinds roots. She watches the sky for patterns. She learns the names of plants from the smell alone. But her movements are mechanical. Her eyes are never still. Every time footsteps crunch outside or a low engine hums on the far road, she stiffens. She doesn't cry anymore. She doesn't scream. But she doesn't breathe either, not fully. One afternoon, the sun hangs low and furious above the hills. Efua is kneeling near the small garden patch behind the hut, her bandaged hand digging shallow holes for new seeds. Her fingers tremble when they touch the soil. The earth feels too clean. Mame walks up behind her. No sound, just presence. She watches Efua for a long moment, then crouches beside her. She reaches down, places her dark, calloused hand over Efua's wrist, not to stop her, but to still her. Her touch is grounding, like placing a rock on paper to keep the wind from stealing it. If you don't clear the trash from your heart, Mom says eyes on the soil, then nothing good can grow there. Efua doesn't answer. Her jaw clenches. Mame pulls a weed with sharp precision, tosses it aside. Efua finally speaks, her voice low, rough. There's too much. Mame shrugs, one weed at a time. Efua lowers her head. Her throat tightens. And then, as if a dam has cracked, the words spill. I was 12 when they took me, she says. I thought they were church people. They gave me bread, clean clothes. Said God had plans. She laughs bitter. God's plan was a pickup truck with no windows. Mame doesn't interrupt, just listens, her hands gently pressing the soil down. They taught me how to lie, how to smile, how to make girls trust me. I helped trick them. The words catch in her throat. She wants to stop. But Mom's hand remains steady on her wrist, so she goes on. I led them, one after another, into the warehouse near the port. I smiled while they cried. I told them it would be okay. Efua's body curls inwards as she speaks, as though protecting a wound no one can see. Sometimes I'd go back, after the men left, just to see if they were still alive. She looks up. They weren't. Mame's eyes meet hers. They are neither soft nor hard, just awake. Efua's lip trembles. Do you know what it's like to smell blood on your own hands for years? Mame answers quietly, yes. That's silence again. Not empty, not dead, just wide. Efua looks down at her palms. The skin is clean, but memory stains deeper. Then, for the first time, we hear her internal monologue, slow, precise, like thoughts spoken from the underside of breath. I was the hand that opened the cage. I was the foot that closed the door. I was the voice that said, trust me. I built the bridge from girlhood to hell, and I smiled while they walked. Her breathing is shaky. Her lips part slightly, as if confessing something to the wind itself. So now I wonder if hands like mine sent them into fire. Can any hand reach back and pull me out? She stares at the soil, the tiny seeds nestled beneath. Life being asked to grow in a place that once fed on pain. Mame speaks again, barely above a whisper. Plant them anyway. Efua blinks. Mame gestures at the seeds. They don't need to forget what the dirt once held. They just need light and time. Efua swallows hard. She pushes one seed deeper into the ground. As they continue planting, Mame hums, an old Yue folk tune, one of mourning but also returning. The camera rises slowly, catching their shadows stretching over the garden bed like two stories intersecting. In the distance, a child's voice echoes faintly, calling for someone. A dog barks. Life persistent. Efua looks up. The light is changing. Softer now. The heat not so sharp. The sky holds streaks of violet. And for a moment, just one, her shoulders drop. Her chest lifts with a full breath. Uninterrupted. The healing has not begun. Not yet. But something has moved. The camera lingers on her face. The wind brushes her braids back, revealing her scar. She doesn't hide it. She simply begins to stand, fade to dusk. The morning arrived not with birdsong, but with sirens. Faint, distant, almost hesitant, but unmistakable. Efua was carrying water from the stream when the sound brushed against her ears like a warning. She paused mid-step, a clay jug balanced on her hip, the cool of the river still clinging to her skin. Her eyes narrowed. Her breath hitched not out of fear, but out of recognition. Sirens meant someone was gone. By the time she reached the hut, Mom was already sitting outside on the low stone bench, motionless, her hands in her lap, her gaze fixed on something far beyond the hills. Efua set the jug down slowly. "What happened?" she asked. Mame didn't look at her. Her voice came as a whisper scraped raw. A girl, 8 years old, from a school near Lake Bosomtwe. Efua's stomach sank. No birds sang, no wind stirred the grass. She sat beside Mom. But her body was already somewhere else, already sprinting back into memory. "I know that route," she said. "It's a low-risk pickup zone. Quiet roads, no cameras." Mame turned to look at her. Her eyes weren't angry. They were grieving. Efua stood up. "I have to write it down," she said, more to herself than to Mam, "before it slips." She walked inside, leaving the door open. The air inside was thick with the scent of old pages and drying herbs. She reached beneath the mattress and pulled out a worn, soft-covered book, the kind children used in school. The pages were water-stained. The cover was torn. She sat on the floor and flipped it open to the back, where the lines were still blank. Her hand hesitated, then moved. A pen scratched across the paper. Name Kabi Sly. Kumasi North Hub, driver Kwabina Ford. White High Ace contact 024. Burned SIM code phrase. Bring 2 crates. Drop point. Swami Warehouse Block 4B. Last seen Kojo. Still alive. She paused over that last line. The name stared up at her like an unanswered prayer. Kojo, the only one who had tried to pull her back when she was too far gone. Kojo, with the quiet eyes and broken wrist, who used to hum gospel songs to drown out screams. Kojo, who'd been taken to the next level for refusing to deliver a child. That was 3 years ago. They said he died in transit, but no one ever saw the body. She circled his name, twice. Outside, the wind picked up. A dry wind, hot and impatient. It banged the loose corner of the roof like a child demanding entry. Efua flipped the book closed. She found Mom still sitting unmoved. "They haven't found her," Efua said. "The girl." Mame nodded once. "They won't. Not unless someone knows where to look." Efua walked slowly to her, clutching the book to her chest, like a shield. "There's still time," she said. Mame said nothing. "If I don't say anything now," Efua whispered, "there will be more. More girls. More mothers with empty rooms. More brothers who never stop waiting." Mame looked up. "Then speak." Efua's voice shook. "You think anyone will believe me?" "You don't need everyone," Mame replied. "You need one." Efua sat on the ground at her feet. She opened the book again, the ink still wet in places. "I remember every name," she said. "Every hand that took money, every license plate, every face I pretended not to see." Her fingers trembled again, but this time she didn't hide it. "Do you know what that does to your mind?" she asked, eyes brimming but dry. "To carry every child you didn't save like they're still holding your hand, only colder." Mame leaned down, brushing one knuckle across Efua's cheek. "That means they're still with you," she said. Efua clutched the notebook tighter. "I want them to haunt me. Every single one. Until I make this right." A silence passed between them. Then Mame stood. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we find someone who listens." Efua nodded. But as she turned back toward the hut, something inside her shifted. This wasn't about memory anymore. It was about voice. And the page in her hand was no longer just paper. It was evidence. It was a weapon. And it had just begun to bleed. Fade to a wide shot. The hills in twilight wind, blowing dust through the valley. Mame anew. And Efua silhouetted in the frame, one standing, one kneeling, a notebook glowing faintly in the dimming sun. The road to Kumasi is long and cracked. Each step Efua takes grinds grit into her soles. She wears old sandals now, Mame's spare pair frayed at the edges, too big but functional. Dust coats her ankles. Sweat beads on her brow. The sky hangs low, thick with the scent of exhaust and impending rain. But she doesn't stop. Strapped tight against her chest beneath a faded shawl is the soft-covered notebook, her ledger of ghosts. Each line, each name is an echo, a confession, a map drawn in blood and regret. When she enters Kumasi, the noise hits her like a slap. Traffic clogs the arteries of the city. Hawkers call out. Radios blare high-life music. But all she hears is what's missing, the silence of the girls who never came home. She moves through this crowd like a shadow, head down, shoulders hunched. Her eyes scan every alley, every bus stop, every truck. Her past is in this city, and it still breathes. She finds Ya Mensa at a rundown print shop tucked behind a mosque on Asokwa Road. The sign out front reads, "Mensa Prints and Tints." But no one prints anything here anymore. Inside it smells of paper, ink, and disillusionment. Ya sits behind a rusted desk, eyes glued to a cracked laptop. He's in his 40s, wearing a threadbare shirt and a look that's seen too many truths go to rot. His beard is patchy, his fingers yellowed from years of smoking and typing and shaking. He looks up when she enters. "Shop's closed," he mutters. "I'm not here for printing." He raises an eyebrow, then notices the notebook she clutches. Efua steps forward. "You're the one who wrote about the Jamasi girls?" 2017. Ya stiffens. "That story never ran," he says. "Too much heat. Too few readers." Efua meets his gaze. "But you knew." "I knew what they let me know," he snaps, irritation flaring. "Then they followed me home. Threatened my sister. Poured paint on my car. You still think truth lives in newspapers?" She doesn't flinch. She opens the notebook and places it on his desk. He stares at it. "Don't play games," he warns. "I've been fed lies by better liars." Efua sits, carefully. She begins to speak. She doesn't tell him her name. She tells him where they keep the girls. She tells him about house mothers and training phases, about the reward system, the punishments, the coded language. She recites the exact dimensions of the nursery's rooms, with no windows, only fans. Rooms where light bulbs are painted blue to disorient. She speaks of intake quotas, truck routes, and burial sites disguised as latrines. Ya says nothing. But he stops typing. She speaks of the sound of a child whispering in a cage. Of the routine. The hymns, the isolation. When she finishes, she slides the notebook closer. "You want names," she says, voice tight. "They're all here, from recruiters to exporters, even the government liaisons." Ya's fingers hover above the pages. He doesn't touch them yet. "Why now?" he asks. "Because another girl is already gone," Efua says. "And if I stay silent, I'm still part of it." Ya leans back in his chair. He runs a hand down his face. The weight of it settles into his bones. "You realize what they'll do if this gets out?" "I do." "They don't just kill people," he warns. "They erase them." Efua's voice drops to a whisper. "I've already died once." Silence. Then Ya reaches out and flips the notebook open. Slowly, reverently. He scans a page, then another, and on the fourth page he stops. His eyes go cold. "You wrote Kojo's name." Efua looks down. "He was my brother." Ya's expression changes. He looks at her for the first time, not as a source, not as a stranger, but as someone who's walked through the same fire. "They said he disappeared." Ya murmurs. "They said he left the country." "They lied," Efua says. "He refused to take a girl. They punished him." Ya closes the notebook. When he speaks, his voice is different, grounded. "Okay," he says. "We start with the warehouse, Swame. If we can film it just one glimpse of the inside, we'll have enough to scare someone into speaking." Efua nods. "But we move quiet," he warns. "No heroics, no speeches." "I don't need to be a hero," Efua says. "I need them to burn." Ya stares at her for a long moment. "You remind me of someone," he says, finally. "Kojo." No, Ya answers. myself. Before I forgot what rage feels like. He stands, shuts the laptop, picks up his camera bag from under the table. Let's go light some matches. They step outside. The sun has begun to drop behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the market stalls and concrete walls. Efua pulls her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The notebook is still in her hands. Each name inside it is a weight, but it's also a weapon. And tonight, it's going to be unsheathed. Fade out on the two figures, walking side by side through the dusk-stained city. Camera lingers on a mural painted on the side of a nearby wall. Children with wings flying above barbed wire. As the shot widens, we hear her voice again, quiet but resolute. Some names are buried. Some are erased. But the dead don't stay quiet forever. Night falls hard. The sky over the hills is ink-thick. No moon, no stars, just a shroud of darkness so deep it seems to drink in sound. Efua returns to the edge of the field, late, the notebook pressed flat against her chest, sweat slicking her neck despite the cool air. But something is wrong. She smells it before she sees it smoke thick and chemical. Not the wood and herb kind Mom uses to boil root tonics. Then fire. A bloom of red on the horizon, not distant, not natural. The kind of fire that screams. She runs. The field is no longer golden. It's an open throat swallowing light. Flames flick from the roof of Mam's hut like tongues from a beast. The straw is already gone. Only bone frame and inferno remain. She screams her name, Mom. No answer. The sheep are bleeding, panicked, trapped in the pen. One lies motionless near the fence, its wool blackened and smoking. Efua rushes through smoke and heat skirts catching embers. She doesn't think she moves. She finds Mommy slumped behind the water drum, barely conscious. Blood runs down her temple. One hand clutches a cloth pressed to her ribs. The other holds a blade, small, rusted, but drawn. Efua drops to her knees, choking on the smoke. Mame, look at me. Mame opens one eye. Her voice is hoarse. They know. Efua's body goes rigid. The fire cracks loud behind them. She tries to lift Mam. The woman groans, but doesn't resist. Together they stumble away from the blaze, every breath a theft. The sheep scatter behind them, terrified shapes darting into the bush. A few meters out, Mom collapses onto the dirt. Efua cradles her head. Mame reaches up, fingers brushing Efua's cheek. Her breath rattles. You lit the right fire, she rasps. No, I brought this to you. I should have never. Mame interrupts. I don't blame. But if you stop now, then all of this is ash. Efua holds back a sob. Do you understand, Mame asks, her voice fading. It only matters if you finish. Efua nods. Then Mame's eyes close, not forever, but far enough that the weight lands on Efua like a second fire. The next shot, daylight. Brief. A burnt-out shell where a home used to stand. Scorched wood, melted metal, one surviving sheep limping through the remains. Mame has gone taken to a clinic by locals. Efua stands alone amid cinder and ruin, the notebook now stained by ash and sweat. Cut to Yaw's cramped apartment. Efua sits across from him, shaking. They tried to erase her, she says. They failed, Yaw replies. Now we erase them. Yaw pulls out a crate and opens the lid. Inside a gray delivery uniform, a lanyard with a forged badge, a small camera wired through a buttonhole. Efua doesn't ask how he got it. She doesn't need to. Yaw hands her a second earpiece. You sure you can act like you belong there? Efua's voice is cold. I don't have to act. Night again. Yaw's borrowed truck rattles down the old Swami service road. The warehouse looms ahead like a giant scar. It's surrounded by chain-link fence lit by sickly yellow floodlights. Security cameras, men with radios. They park 50 feet from the gate. Keep the engine running, Efua says. Yaw nods. She steps out, slamming the door shut with authority. She walks like she's done this before because she has. 2 guards at the gate stop her. Who you for, one demands. Late drop, she says, holding up the badge. Boss man say bring crates to block B. The guard narrows his eyes. Why this late? Efua shrugs. Because you lot never sleep a beat. The other guard snorts. She no wrong. The first one motions. Open the back. Efua taps her foot as Yaw climbs out and unlatches the truck's rear. Inside, 2 wooden crates empty except for sandbags, real enough to fool a glance. The guards grunt and wave them through. As they pull into the lot, Efua's face is stone. But her eyes flick everywhere. Cameras exits faces. Nothing has changed. It's all still here. The monster never left. Inside the warehouse, everything smells the same oil sweat bleach. A man in a stained tank top points toward the loading zone. "Put him over there." Yaw lingers by the door. Efua moves toward the drop zone, but her hand is already adjusting the pinhole camera in her shirt. She angles her body toward the holding corridor. She catches it. A flicker. A door marked "Authorized Only" opening just wide enough to show a child's arm yanked out of sight. Her breath catches. Yaw's voice crackles in her ear. "We've got it. Time to go." But Efua doesn't move. Not yet. She stares at that door like it's a wound. Efua, Yaw hisses. "We got what we need." She finally turns. But as she leaves, her eyes burn. The fire is no longer just behind her. It's under her skin. They drive away, the warehouse shrinking behind them, returning to the shadows it never left. Back in the truck, Yaw pulls the earpiece out, laughing in disbelief. "You did it. You just walked into hell and walked out." Efua doesn't respond. She stares out the window. The fire took her home. Her voice whispers in monologue. "Now, I'll take their empire." The night cracked open with gunmetal thunder. Efua didn't see the betrayal coming. One moment she and Yaw were parked outside the drop site, their footage encrypted, their plan airtight. The next, glass-shattering shouts entwine, a hand wrenching her from the cab. Yaw's scream was muffled beneath fists. Efua was dragged into the dark. Her arms pinned her notebook, snatched from her chest like a stolen heartbeat. They didn't kill her. That would have been too easy. They threw her into a container and shut the world behind a rusted steel door. It slammed with such force that silence bloomed like an explosion inside her skull. Pitch black. The air thick with oil, urine, metal, and old fear. The container wasn't empty. It held memory. Ghosts. Chains of breath that once belonged to girls who never got out. Efua stumbled in the dark, hands out. The walls were closer than she remembered. Her lungs struggled. Sweat broke across her neck, cold and fast. She reached for the latch, useless. Locked from outside. Bolted. She screamed. No answer. Time warped. She couldn't tell whether minutes passed or hours. Her legs gave out eventually. She collapsed to her knees, chest heaving. Her back hit the corrugated steel, and for a long time she was nothing but breath and pulse and regret. Then, a sound, a whisper. So small she thought it was her own mind splitting, but there it was again. A breath. Shaky, wet. "Hello," Efua rasped. Silence. Then a whimper. Crawling across metal, Efua followed the sound with her hands. They met skin, small, damp, trembling. "Shh. I'm here," she whispered. The body recoiled, then stilled. Efua reached gently. Her hands found tiny arms. A thin neck. Bones too sharp beneath too thin flesh. "What's your name?" she asked. A pause. Then Akoshua. Efua closed her eyes. She had heard that name earlier, murmured in a list. One of the new ones. Newly taken. Efua pulled the child close. Her own body curled instinctively, shielding her. Akasua's voice shook. "Are you one of them?" Efua's reply came from her ribs. "I was." The girl stiffened. "But not now," Efua whispered. "Not now." A long pause. Then timidly, Akosua nestled closer. Trust was quiet. But it came. Hours passed. Maybe more. At some point, Akoshua slept, soft, uneven breaths fluttering against Efua's arm. Efua stayed awake. In the dark, her mind opened like a wound. "This is where I brought them," she thought. "This box, this air, this darkness. I led them into it. But I will not leave her here." She scanned the container, felt every seam with her fingers. Her hands landed on a rusted vent panel loose at the corners. She sat up, shifted Akoshua aside gently. Her fingers found a corner. She began to work. Pain sliced her palm, but she kept going. Rust bit her skin. Her breath came short, labored. She pulled, yanked. With a shriek, the corner of the panel snapped free. Fresh air spilled in so faint it barely stirred her skin. But it was enough. She turned to Akoshwa. "We're leaving." The girl blinked at her, dazed. "How?" Efua didn't answer. She wedged her fingers into the gap, pulled again. The metal screamed. She didn't stop. Finally, the panel ripped wide. Efua climbed halfway through, then turned, reached back. "Come." Akasua hesitated. "I'll carry you," Efua said. "But you have to trust me." Akasua crawled toward her. Efua pulled her through the gap. Together they dropped from the container into tall grass. Rain had begun thin and cold. The air was sharp, real. Alarms hadn't sounded. No one had seen them yet. Efua didn't wait. She grabbed Akoshwa's hand and ran. Through mud thorns, broken fences. Through the backs of lots filled with scrap metal and dead cars. Through shadows that screamed and lights that blinked like lies. The girl stumbled once. Efua caught her. Another stumble this time. Efua lifted her, carried her against her chest. "I'm not running because I'm afraid." Efua's voice came in narration. "I'm running because she doesn't deserve to know what I've known." They reached the forest line. Branches whipped past them. Roots threatened every step. The child cried softly, face buried against Efua's collarbone. Efua's arms burned. Her lungs tore. But she ran, because to stop was to lose. Because this wasn't escape, it was rebirth. They didn't stop until morning broke. The sky cracked pale gold behind the trees. The road ahead led nowhere but away. They collapsed at the edge of a ravine, breathless, soaked, shaking. Efua laid Akoswa down on the grass, checked her forehead. Bruised, but breathing. The girl looked up. "You're bleeding," she said. Efua looked at her hands. The gash across her palm, the blood on her shoulder. She smiled. "It's not mine anymore," she said. "It's hers. Yours. For the ones who couldn't run." Akasua touched her face gently. "Are you an angel?" Efua laughed, broken and low. "No," she said. "I'm the reason angels cry." The wind picked up. Behind them the trees swayed. In the distance, sirens again, real this time. Growing closer, Efua stood bloodied, breathless, but taller, because now she wasn't the girl who once closed doors. She was the woman who broke them open. Rain pelted the windows of the regional police station like tiny fists pounding to be heard. Efua sat in a concrete room. Pale blue walls, a blanket over her shoulders, eyes fixed on the one-way mirror. Across from her, two plainclothes officers flipped through a folder of statements and blurry surveillance prints. But Efua wasn't watching them. She was watching her reflection, distorted in the glass. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Her wrists were bandaged. Her throat still bore bruises from the ambush. And yet, she looked stronger, grounded, like someone who had crawled through the fire and come out not untouched, but reborn. Yaw paced outside the door, arguing in low-clipped English with a senior investigator. "You have her testimony. The footage. The map. What more do you need? Blood on their hands in real time." The officer exhaled sharply. "You don't understand, Mr. Mensah. Some of those names, they're not street boys. They're inside. Parliament, immigration, judiciary," Yaw snapped. "So we just keep the lid on and let the children keep vanishing." The officer didn't respond. Inside the room, Efua quietly unwrapped a second notebook, one Yaw had given her. Fresh pages. Untouched. She opened it and began to write again. Not for them to forget, but for them to finally know. 2 days later, Efua and Akosua were relocated under the early phase of witness protection. New names, a secure house just outside Sunyani, and a silent file buried in bureaucracy. Akosua was safe now. She slept with the light on, sometimes clutched Efua's shirt in her sleep. But she smiled when she woke. Efua knew safety was temporary. The rot was still alive. She met Yaw in a parked car 2 towns over, a cloth scarf hiding her hair, a cap pulled low. Yaw opened the laptop on his lap. "We go public." Efua shook her head. "They'll find us." Yaw turned the screen toward her. Already preloaded a masked account. A direct stream path to multiple burner platforms. Anonymous uploads. Pre-scheduled shares. No trace. This time he said we let the people hunt them. They began slowly, voice recordings, blurry footage initials. A map of warehouse locations overlaid with red X's. One by one, they laid out every eye that looked away, every finger that pointed, every silence that sold a child. The live streams caught fire. Comments poured in, then emails, then calls from mothers who had buried empty caskets, from girls who escaped and were never believed, from a man in Tamale who once drove a truck full of cargo and couldn't sleep since. And slowly victims began to speak, some in shadow, some with faces. One girl no older than 14 looked into the camera and said, "Efua was the one who locked my door. And now, she's the one breaking it open." But it wasn't just the screen that caught fire. It was the streets. Graffiti began to appear near truck stops, red-painted lambs and the word, "enough." But then came the pushback. The Bangyam, those who still had their hands in flesh, struck back. They targeted one of the underground shelters that had just taken in 4 rescued girls. You got the call at 2:13 a.m. "They're coming." CCTV picked up masked men in black pickups circling the center. The footage was cut within minutes. Efua didn't hesitate. She didn't call the police. She called one-man Detective Azare, the only one who hadn't flinched when he heard the truth. "We'll be there," he said, "but don't wait." Efua arrived first. The shelter's back door was already broken in. Smoke curled out from the hallway. The fire hadn't reached the dormitory yet, but it was spreading fast. Screams echoed inside. Yaw pulled up seconds later, camera already rolling. "You're not going in alone." But Efua had already disappeared into the black. Inside was a nightmare from her past. Smoke, heat, panic, the smell of synthetic fabric burning. But this time, she wasn't a shadow in the corner. She was the one who opened the doors. She found one girl curled under a desk coughing blood, another behind a cabinet, knees drawn to her chest, rocking. Efua grabbed them both, guiding them through the fire-blurred corridor. Behind her a beam cracked. The ceiling groaned. She turned the final corner and saw her, a small girl, no more than 6, pressed against a locker, frozen. Efua's body screamed to stop. Her lungs tore with smoke. But she ran. She lifted the girl into her arms. Then the room collapsed. Not all of it, but enough. The camera Yaw held shook violently as he sprinted forward. Flames burst from a window. The roof caved in. Then movement. Efua stumbled out, cradling the girl. Her face blackened, her hands red. Blood, but not from violence. From protection. She collapsed on the grass just beyond the burning doorway, the girl still breathing in her arms. The paramedics arrived first, then Detective Asare's squad. By morning the fire was out, but something else had lit up. The footage Yaw captured the girl being carried from flame by the same woman who once carried children to their doom went viral. Every news station, every radio wave, every feed. And the question was no longer, can we believe her? It was, what the hell have we been ignoring? Efua sat in the back of an ambulance. Her hands were bandaged, soaked in disinfectant, and trembling. But not from fear, from the rush of being alive. Truly alive. Yaw stood nearby, camera lowered now. "You're bleeding," he said. Efua met his eyes. And this time she said it means something. Fade out to a still image, Efua's silhouette at dawn, the burned shelter behind her, the rescued girl clutching her hand. Voiceover: "I hunted because I was hunted first. Now I stand because they cannot. This is not redemption. This is war." The courtroom was colder than expected, not in temperature, but in tone. Like it had been scrubbed clean of feeling long before the trial ever began. Marble walls, polished wood. A judge who didn't blink. A public gallery packed with whispers and hungry stares. Reporters, families, survivors, skeptics. Men in suits who once looked away. Women clutching photos of girls who never came back. Efua stood at the witness stand in a plain gray blouse, her hair tied back, her hands resting in front of her, calm on the outside, trembling on the inside. Across from her sat the man who once called himself her savior. Kwesi Uncle Lion Obeng, the one who took her in at 12. Who trained her how to smile with her mouth and lie with her eyes. Who said she was just a seed in the soil and he would teach her how to grow. Who laughed as he counted bodies like livestock sipping tea while mothers buried hope. Now he sat behind a line of attorneys, still wearing a gold ring on every finger, still leaning back like this was just another meeting. But there was something different in his eyes. He wasn't looking at Efua like a tool anymore. He was looking at her like a threat. The prosecutor, a woman with hard shoulders and a pen, always moving, asked Efua to state her full name. Efua na Yeboah. And your role in the events we are reviewing today. Efua looked at the judge. Then the gallery. She paused. I was a recruiter, she said, her voice clear. I delivered children into systems that broke them. I smiled while doors closed behind them. I walked away while they screamed. A murmur swept through the courtroom. And today, I'm standing here because I broke. The prosecutor nodded. Tell us about Kwesi Obeng. Efua's eyes didn't leave him. He taught me everything I knew. Not about saving lives, but selling them. He told me my body was worth more if I didn't fight. That obedience was currency. That silence was survival. Kwesi chuckled quietly. Efua raised her voice. He called me his pawn, said I was useful because I didn't ask questions. But I was a child. 12, hungry, alone. He didn't save me. He rewrote me. The room went still. Efua's voice softened, but sharpened like a knife, whispering before it cuts. I'm not here to ask forgiveness, she said. I don't deserve it. I'm not here for redemption. I'm here so there's no one else like me. No girl turned into a door that leads only into cages. There was no reaction from Kwesi, but his lawyer shifted. The judge blinked slowly. Efua stepped away from the stand and took a breath that sounded like it had waited years to come out. The prosecutor sat down. Then it was the defense's turn. Kwesi's attorney rose. A smooth man, polished, paid to make monsters sound like cautionary tales. He tried to trap her in words. You chose, you consented. You were never physically forced. But Efua didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply said, At 12, I thought safety meant obedience. You taught me that. You. All of you. He pressed her, asking why she stayed so long. Why she returned even after retiring. Why she didn't walk away sooner. Efua's reply silenced the room. I stayed, she said, because I was made to believe I was already broken. And broken things don't get rescued. They get used. The judge called for a recess. The room buzzed like static. Efua stepped out into the hall, her hands shaking. She leaned against a wall, letting the adrenaline drain. Yaw stood nearby, filming from a respectful distance. Behind him, the crowd pressed forward, victims, advocates, journalists, ghosts. Then someone called her name. Efua. She turned. Akosua stood at the far end of the hallway beside a protective officer. The girl wore a navy dress, her hair braided back neatly, her arms locked stiff at her sides. Efua's knees almost gave out. They hadn't let her see Akosua since the night of the shelter fire official protocol protection recovery. But here she was. She took a step forward, but the officer raised a hand. Glass partition, he said gently. They led Akosua into the adjacent observation room. Efua followed the hallway to the mirrored wall. On one side, a woman made of scars. On the other, a child built from survival. Efua placed her hand against the glass. Akosua mirrored her. No words, just breathing. The glass vibrated faintly from the weight of meaning. Then slowly, Akosua lifted her other hand and pointed to the scar on Efua's left collarbone, faint but visible. The one she got the night she tried to run. The one the men said would remind her who owns her. The one she'd never shown Akosua before. The girl touched her own chest in the same spot. Then she smiled. Not wide, not childish, but full. Efua pressed her forehead to the glass, and Akosua whispered, not loud enough for anyone else to hear. You saved me. A single tear slid down Efua's face. Inside the courtroom, the judge returned. The gallery fell quiet. Verdicts waited. Headlines stirred. But in that moment outside, the noise in the quiet of a glass pane between trauma and hope, something sacred passed between two souls. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, but recognition. Efua stepped back, stood tall, walked toward the door like a woman who had already won, no matter what the court decided. Voiceover low and steady. I once followed the hand that fed on innocence. Now I stand with the ones who lived through it. And together we point to the dark and call it by name. New York was colder than she expected. Efua stood beneath the steel sky of Manhattan, looking up at the flags fluttering outside the United Nations headquarters, rows upon rows of colors movement declarations. but her eyes paused on none of them. She wasn't here for politics. She was here for memory. The doors opened before her, tall, silent, guarded. She walked through metal detectors and under fluorescent lights. Her shoes clicked softly against marble. Around her aides whispered in 6 languages, translators passed notes, and cameras blinked red like eyes that never slept. She had never been further from Kumasi, and yet never closer. A staffer ushered her toward the backstage area past a waiting room filled with suits and lanyards, and people who hadn't known war, only strategy. Efua wore a simple dark dress, no makeup, hair braided tight. Her fingers clutched a single folded page, her speech. She hadn't memorized it, not because she couldn't, but because some words need to be rediscovered, not recited. Behind the curtain she paused, closed her eyes, and saw them. The children, not screaming this time, not caged, but standing, watching, breathing, alive. A voice in her earpiece whispered, 3 minutes. You're next. She nodded. Half a world away, in a quiet village in Ghana, Maame sat in a small clay-walled room, now fitted with solar lights. She wore a shawl across her shoulders, her hair white and soft, and her legs covered with a blanket. Her knees had given up a year ago, but her eyes had not. They were locked on the small screen in front of her. On her lap, curled gently, a lamb barely 6 weeks old snored in sleep. The screen flickered. The logo appeared. Live United Nations Human Rights Assembly. The MC introduced the speaker, Efua na Yaboa, former victim and now global advocate for anti-trafficking justice, representing the testimony of the silenced. Mame's hand slowly moved, resting on the lamb's head. Back in New York, Efua stepped into the light. The hall was vast, hundreds of faces, most unfamiliar, many unreadable. Lights tracked her every move. She walked to the podium. No tremble in her hands, no apology in her posture. She adjusted the mic and began. My name is Efua, she said. It means born on Friday. But for many years I wasn't allowed to choose how I lived or if I lived at all. Her voice didn't waver. I was trafficked at 12. I became a tool of the same system that swallowed me. I carried children into places no child should go, and then one day I stopped. She glanced at her paper, then folded it, set it down, spoke without it. Today I speak not as a hero, but as a graveyard, a living one. Inside me are names, faces, stories that were buried before anyone knew they'd lived. The translator booth scrambled to keep up, but there is something else inside me. Efua continued, a small girl who whispered in the dark, who didn't ask to be saved, but who held my hand when I was too afraid to move. She believed me. That's why I'm here. A murmur stirred through the room. There are still people in power, she said, voice tightening, who want this story buried, who call us damage, disgrace, dirt. But let me say this clearly, this. She leaned slightly forward, not loud, but unignorable. We are not trash. Silence. We are not wreckage. Silence. We are witnesses that hope still breathes. The room held its breath. I do not ask you to cry for us. I ask you to stand with us. To ensure that no child, no girl, no boy, no body is ever traded again, because the cost is not just theirs. It's yours. It's all of ours. A pause. Then she stepped back. I thank you. And the final sentence, not rehearsed, but born in that breath. We are not garbage. We are testimony that hope has not died. Silence for a beat, then applause, not thunderous, not political, but real. Back in Ghana, Mommy let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The lamb stirred in her lap. She touched its ear. Her whisper was almost a prayer, she's still planting. At the United Nations, the camera cut briefly to the crowd. Yaw stood toward the back, arms folded, eyes glassy. He had filmed warlords. He had buried stories no one wanted, but nothing like this. The applause swelled again. Efua stepped off the stage and walked straight past cameras, past hands stretched for handshakes, past praise. Outside, she found a bench beneath the flags. She sat, closed her eyes. The wind brushed her cheeks like breath. From the pocket of her coat, she pulled a small, smooth stone one Akoshu had given her before the flight. It had a word scratched into it, barely legible. Safe. Efua smiled. Not wide, not for show, but fully, for the first time. Voiceover. They taught me to obey. Then I learned to break. Now I teach them to see, not the scars, but the space where light still grows. Fade to soft white. The first thing she planted wasn't a tree. It was a wall, one painted with hands, dozens of them. Tiny, crooked, trembling hands in red, blue, yellow. Children's hands. On a wide cement wall at the entrance of a single-story clay brick building tucked behind a dusty road in northern Ghana. There was no plaque, no donor name, no government logo. Only 4 words etched in bold white paint beneath the waves of color. You begin from here. Efua stood before the wall paintbrush, still wet in her hand, her breath catching in her throat. The children behind her laughed and ran barefoot across the new courtyard, their voices brighter than any anthem. It had been 6 months since New York. 2 years since the trial, 3 since the fire. The world had gone on spinning, but Efua had built something that refused to forget. The center was not a shelter, not an orphanage, not a home for the broken. It was a place designed by those who knew what being broken meant. A place where no lock existed, where every room had light from both sky and ground. Where bedtime was a choice and meals weren't bribes. Efua called it Ankabam House, the house of stitching back. In the mornings, she painted, not flowers, but memory. The mural inside her office showed a small white lamb curled in the arms of a woman whose dress was soaked in blood. Her face was half turned, but her eyes were wide open, staring down at the creature like it was something holy. She painted it in layers, red first, then light, then the lamb. She was finishing a brushstroke on the woman's sleeve when a door burst open behind her. Footsteps, fast, bare, laughter small and wild. Then Efua looked. Akosua ran into the room, barefoot, her face full of dirt and joy, her arms wrapped around something squirming. At her heels trailed a wiry, mud-streaked dog, clearly a street pup with one ear chewed ribs visible and a tail wagging like it had never been allowed to wag before. Efua turned, dropping the brush. Akosua beamed. He followed me from the old market. I gave him ground nuts, and now he won't leave. The dog barked once, nervously but hopeful. Efua knelt slowly. The dog inched forward, sniffing, then licked her palm. He's yours now, Efua said softly. No, Akosua replied, shaking her head. He's ours. Efua froze, then smiled. Not polite, not performance, but the kind of smile that starts from the place where bone meets soul. Akosua hugged the dog tighter. I want to name him Kojo, she said. Efua's breath hitched, but she nodded. The dog barked again, louder now. The camera pulled back. In the courtyard, children played soccer barefoot, painted each other's faces, braided hair. One boy sat in the shade, reading out loud to a girl who was humming. A caretaker stirred rice in a giant pot over an open fire. In a corner, a young girl taught another how to tie a headscarf. No one screamed. No one begged. Every voice here was alive. Inside the office, Efua turned back to the mural. She picked up the brush. The final stroke was small, the eye of the lamb rimmed in gold. She stepped back, staring. Then from somewhere beyond the frame, her voice emerged, not as a scream, not as a plea, but as a vow. I don't want to erase the past. I want to till it. Break it open. Let its rot feed something better. Let it become soil, so someone else, someone braver can grow. The camera rose above the center. From this height, it looked like a seed nestled in red earth, small, quiet, defiant. A banner fluttered near the gate. We are the light that refused to die. Fade to white, then silence. Then the sound of laughter. A dog barking, a child singing, and footsteps running forward.